brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Tamina Snuka. Sarona Moana-Marie Reiher Snuka-Polamalu is an American professional wrestler and actress currently signed to WWE under the ring name Tamina, performing on the SmackDown brand. Wild Samoan Training Center and World Xtreme Wrestling, 2009. Snuka first became involved in professional wrestling after she received the first Maivia scholarship to train at the Wild Samoan Training Center in Mineola, Florida. Various alliances, 2010-2011. On the May 24, 2010, episode of Raw, Snuka debuted as a villainous character under the ring name Tamina, along with Jimmy USO and Jay USO, by attacking the unified tag team champions, the Hart Dynasty. The next week, on the May 31 episode of Raw, Tamina and the Usos introduced themselves and stated that the Hart Dynasty were in the wrong place at the wrong time, before again brawling with the trio. On June 20 at Fatal 4-Way, Tamina and the Usos were defeated by the Hart Dynasty in a six-person mixed tag team match, after Natalya pinned Tamina. 2 weeks later, on the June 21 episode of Raw, Tamina made her singles debut against Natalya, but the match ended in a no contest after the Nexus interrupted the match. On the June 28 episode of Raw, Tamina and the Usos were scheduled to face the Hart Dynasty in another six-person mixed tag team match, but instead attacked them during their entrance, leading to Tamina throwing Natalya in the ring and executing the Superfly Splash on her. On the July 12 episode of Raw, Tamina and the Usos won their first match by defeating the Hart Dynasty in a six-person mixed tag team match. At the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, Tamina accompanied the Usos to a tag team match against the Hart Dynasty, which the Usos lost. On the July 26 episode of Raw, Tamina, along with Jimmy USO, accompanied Jay USO to a singles match against Randy Orton, but Jay was unsuccessful in defeating Orton. On the August 9 episode of Raw, Tamina began flirting with Santino Marella, hinting a face turn. 2 weeks later, Tamina accompanied the Usos in a tag team match against Marella and Vladimir Kozlov in a losing effort, but Tamina would then afterwards stop the Usos from attacking Marella, and blew a kiss to him as she left the ring. On the September 27 episode of Raw, Tamina competed in a Divas Battle Royal to determine the #1 contender to the WWE Divas Championship, which was ultimately won by Natalya. On the October 11 episode of Raw, Tamina joined Santino Marella after his victory over Zack Ryder and celebrated with him. A few weeks later, on the November 8 episode of Raw, Tamina teamed with Alicia Fox and Maurice in a Diva Cup match, in a losing effort to Eve Torres and the Bella Twins. On the November 15 episode of Raw, Tamina accompanied the Usos to a #1 contenders tag team match against Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov in a losing effort. Tamina made a backstage appearance with Marella and Kozlov on the November 22 episode of Raw, when she serenaded and kissed Marella. 2 weeks later, on the November 29 episode of Raw, Tamina teamed with Alicia Fox and Maurice in a six-diva tag team match against Natalya, Gail Kim and Melina, but was distracted by Marella serenading her, and she left the ring with him. On the December 6 episode of Raw, Tamina began an on-screen relationship with Marella, beginning by accompanying him and his partner Vladimir Kozlov in a three-team elimination tag team match against the teams of the Nexus and the Usos in a winning effort, as Tamina got into the ring and kissed Marella. officially becoming the valet of the team. On the December 20th episode of Raw, Tamina teamed with Morella in a mixed tag team match in a winning effort against Maurice and Ted DiBiase Jr. The next week, on the December 27th episode of Raw, Snuka accompanied Morella to a win against Ted DiBiase. On the January 3rd episode of Raw, Tamina accompanied Morella and Vladimir Kozlov in a tag team match against the Usos in a losing effort. Divas Championship Pursuits 2011-2013. After being drafted to the SmackDown brand as part of the 2011 supplemental draft, Tamina made her SmackDown debut as a villain on the May 27th episode of SmackDown, teaming with Alicia Fox to defeat the team of AJ and Caitlyn, who were accompanied by their mentor Natalya. A week later on SmackDown, Tamina and Fox again defeated AJ and Caitlyn, with Tamina pinning AJ. On the June 13th episode of Superstars, Tamina competed in Essex Diva tag team match with Alicia Fox and Rosa Mendes in a losing effort to AJ, Caitlyn and Natalya. Tamina then began appearing on the 5th season of NXT Redemption, debuting on the October 26th episode in a loss to Caitlyn. On the November 2nd episode of NXT Redemption, Tamina would lose again in a rematch against Caitlyn. Tamina would then begin an on-screen relationship with JTG, becoming his valet. She accompanied him on the November 9th episode of NXT Redemption in a losing effort against Jimmy USO. On the December 30th episode of SmackDown, Tamina teamed with Natalya in a losing effort to Caitlyn and Alicia Fox, and would afterwards attack Natalya, turning face in the process, and beginning a feud between the two about their respective families. Over the next 2 weeks on SmackDown, Tamina would defeat Natalya in singles competition. On the February 10th episode of SmackDown, Tamina saved Alicia Fox from an attack by the WWE Divas champion Beth Phoenix. Tamina and Beth would then have a stare-down, which resulted in Snuka challenging Phoenix for her title. Tamina, now billed as Tamina Snuka, received her title shot on February 19th at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, but was defeated by Phoenix. On the April 25th episode of NXT Redemption, Snuka and Caitlyn defeated the team of Maxine and Natalya. On the June 6th episode of NXT Redemption, Snuka defeated Natalya. At the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, Snuka teamed up with Caitlyn and Layla, defeating the team of Beth Phoenix, Natalya and Eve Torres. Snuka appeared on the rebranded NXT 3 days later, where she defeated Caitlyn. On the August 20th episode of Raw, Snuka competed in a number 1 contenders battle royal, but was unsuccessful in winning the match. Also during the match, Snuka suffered a legitimate back injury. After 3 months of inactivity, Snuka returned from injury on November 18th at the Survivor Series pay-per-view as a heel, interrupting a segment between AJ Lee and Vicky Guerrero by attacking AJ from behind. Snuka made her in-ring return on the November 26th episode of Raw, defeating Alicia Fox. On the January 28, 2013 episode of Raw, Snuka faced Divas champion Caitlyn in a non-title Lumberjill match. However, the match ended in a no contest after the Lumberjills interfered. On February 17th, at Elimination Chamber, Snuka unsuccessfully challenged Caitlyn for the Divas Championship. On the June 5th episode of NXT, Snuka was defeated by Paige in the first round of the NXT Women's Championship tournament to crown the inaugural champion. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.